Welcome to On Background, an iPolitics podcast where we dive deep into the stories behind politics, sharing the behind-the-scenes tales that often go untold. I'm your host, Fred Delory, and today we're bringing you one of Canada's great storytellers and a book that's already stirring up the Canadian political scene. Our guest is none other than journalist and author Stephen Maher. He's just penned a fascinating book about Justin Trudeau called The Prince. I've known Maher since we both arrived on the Hill over 2 decades ago. He is a journalist for the Chronicle Herald and me as a communications advisor for Stephen Harper's leadership campaign. We went on to feud, as journalists and comm directors do, but today we'll set the rivalry aside. Stephen writes both fiction and nonfiction, so we're going to have some fun diving into both sides of his work. So pour yourself a drink, sit back, and join us for this fun chat with Stephen Maher, author of The Prince. Thanks for coming on, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Fred. What a pleasure.
It's I got to say, it's really fun to be on the opposite side of the mic now and asking you the questions.
No comment. When we have something to say, we'll let you know. All right?
Okay, this is real role reversal here, because I think that was a good first 10 years of our relationship, was me basically ducking as much as I could, responding to you. I remember being in the office, and anytime the phone would ring and Maher, your name, Steve Maher, comes up on my phone, it's just like, fuck. What's he digging into now? So you, we arrived here at the same time almost. You came up 2002, 3?
No, 2004. I say that I came when Paul Martin had a majority.
Right. Right. Okay, so I started working on Harper's leadership campaign January of 2004.
Right.
So it was pretty well the same time, because one of the first assignments I had, I was an Atlantic Canadian, so I was assigned to go spin Atlantic media for the leadership campaign. So I remember calling you. Right. Now, I don't remember exactly the conversation, but I remember you were on the list.
I don't remember seeing you at that convention where Mr. Harper won.
No, I was in the war room.
You were in
Ottawa at that time. Yeah, Yaroslav was down, who was my boss at the time.
And I do remember talking to Yaroslav at length at that event. It was quite a thing.
Yeah, no, look, winning a leadership race is fun. I've done it a few times. Yes. I've also lost a few, so it's different emotions. But you've gone on to have a tremendous career in Ottawa. You worked at Post Media and here at iPolitics as well, and covered a lot of stuff.
And Maclean's for a long time.
Maclean's, right, yeah. Right. We've also had some tough situations. I remember you and Glenn on the robocall story. That was a real test to for my career, dealing with that on that side of it. And I always joke with you that, I know you write fiction and nonfiction, and the best fiction you ever wrote was the robocall story. So that was,
yes. I should say that I don't believe I wrote any fiction at that time, yes. But I don't object to you characterizing it that way.
We will agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
But look, it's great having you here, and I'm excited about this book. And obviously, as you know, I like to write a lot too. I've working on my own fiction story, and I'm curious the process for this and where you got the idea to write this and what drove you to do it.
Well, I'll say that over the years, when I came to Ottawa in 2004, I was very excited by the prospect of being in the press gallery and covering federal politics at the highest level. And at that time, I started reading a lot of the great Canadian political books. I remember an important one was Renegade in Power by Peter C. Newman, which is sort of hard slogging all these decades later, but it really was the first political book where the reader felt they were getting behind the scenes in, the Diefenbaker government in that case. And I continued to sort of read those books. I was influenced by Sawatsky's book on Mulroney, Stevie Cameron's book on Mulroney, Lawrence Martin's book on Chrétien. So I had always sort of thought, well, one day perhaps I'll do a book like that.
Right.
And in this case, the impetus for it actually came from Simon & Schuster. They thought that there should be a book on Trudeau.
Okay.
And they suggested it to me, and I thought about it for like 24 hours, and then I thought of my thesis, which is that he's a princely sort of figure and best understood in that way.
Yeah.
And then I started to get excited about it and started to work at it, and it was a lot of work. It was too much work. If anyone's ever thinking of doing something like this, I would say, well, think long and hard, because
Now,
it's a grind.
Did you not write most of it on a boat in the Caribbean, though?
Yes, my life has its ups and downs. Yeah, I have a sailboat in the Caribbean, and but I was working.
Yes, yeah.
I have Starlink on the boat, so I would be doing my Zoom interviews on the boat. And, and a boat is actually a fantastic place to write, because you're really isolated.
Right, limited distractions and
yeah.
Okay, so is this is your
no snow?
Right. This is your first nonfiction, is it not? Like, you wrote a number of fiction books.
Yeah, no. Earlier, my first book was a restaurant guide to Nova Scotia in.
Oh wow!
God, I don't like to think what year that would have been.
I didn't know you wrote a guide. I knew you used to write for the Herald doing restaurant reviews when you were first breaking into the business, but I didn't know you wrote a guide. So, like, we have our own, like, Michelin star, Mars star guide. Oh wow!
It was called The Hungry Critic: A Guide to Nova Scotia Restaurants. And I did also a book about Hurricane Juan for the Chronicle Herald. I sort of edited and assembled a book about that. But this is my first real serious nonfiction book.
Right. And what was so when you started doing this, what was obviously you laid out what you wanted to write. How was, like, getting access to the key players?
Well, that was the most difficult thing. It was, I think it's kind of like sales. I did something like 200 interviews for the book.
Oh, wow.
And I spent a lot of time trying to get people to talk to me.
Yeah.
And, so you're polite and persistent, and nobody has to talk to you.
Yeah.
So you're trying to make it, easy for them to talk to you, and make sure that they're not... people are often sort of nervous about exposing themselves or being in the public eye, and
burning relationships. We're talking about intimate conversations they may have had with other people, right? There's always
that was quite delicate, and just took a lot of time, because people would get the email and they'd say, well, maybe, and my approach was to say, okay, well, I'm going to be not strategic, just forthcoming. Here's what I think. Here's what I'm writing. Here's what I want to ask you about.
Right.
It can be on the record. It can be off the record. My thinking being that at the end of it, I want to be confident that everyone who spoke to me basically gave me informed consent for the way that they're going to appear in the book. That they would understand what they were getting into.
Yes. Well, look, you've interviewed me on this book too, right? So we've had a number of conversations.
Yes. So I've brought a copy here, and I think you should look in the index and see how many times it says Delory.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm going to do this right now. So I'm opening this up. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm in there a lot. That's
no pictures, unfortunately.
No pictures. Not a picture book?
There are pictures, just not of you.
8 pages I made it into by the looks of it. That's...
Yeah, and you actually gave me...
I'm in there a lot compared to others I'm seeing too.
You had useful things to say about the sort of struggle that your party faced in dealing with Trudeau early on.
Right.
And gave me one of the chapter titles, not chapter, but section titles, Son of Canada.
That came from me.
That came from you.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool to be included in in an historic book like this.
Yeah.
And it's true. He is, going into Trudeau and the perception of him, he was viewed as the son of Canada. He's someone who, born on Christmas Day to a sitting prime minister. How do you Canadians wanted him to succeed. And I guess they'll be the judge next election, whether he has or not.
That's an interesting insight that I got from Gerald Butts in the book, that they picked up from the focus groups early on, that when the Conservatives had sort of convinced people that he wasn't ready, the feeling they got, the vibe from the focus groups, was that people found that disappointing to be convinced of that.
Right. They hoped that he was ready.
They hoped that he was ready, and they wanted to believe in him because they felt that they'd known him for so long.
And I think from our perspective, it was people really wanted him to succeed. They wanted him to do well. We had to say he wasn't ready, though. He's not ready for the big job.
Yeah.
So you can see from our perspective why it made sense at the time. Unfortunately, he showed up at the election very ready, and that's what really doomed us.
In a way, it was it gave him a sort of referendum question to wrestle with, and he had to demonstrate that he was ready.
When you make the ballot question, are you ready or not? And then he shows up at these debates, and his pants stayed up, and he did a great job. And we were
our friend Corey probably made a small mistake, one of his few small mistakes.
Yeah, I think we could look at it and highlight it, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. It's not like we set the expectations or that it changed anything by him making that comment or not.
No.
It was true. We were expecting Trudeau. Everyone was expecting Trudeau to not do well in debates.
Yeah.
And he did very well.
Yeah, I talked to a member of the Conservative War Room who was watching it, with
live
with the other people, and the vibe in the room at the time was, well, that's too bad. He did fairly well there, right? That's we thought he wouldn't do that well.
Yeah, that was tough.
Yeah.
So did you interview the Prime Minister himself?
I did, yes. Very near the end of the book, after I whined and wheedled and
took a long. Like, you go to him right away when you start this process, or do you?
I went to his director of communications early on. There were 2 directors of communications during the time that I was writing this book, and both of them kindly agreed to meet with me, and I was able to give them my pitch for the book, to talk to them, and but they didn't. I say they didn't. He didn't make up his mind to actually give me an interview until very near the end. The book was actually in manuscript form already, had been edited.
Okay.
So it was a matter of taking the stuff and sticking it in here and there throughout.
Right. Imagine it's hard. I was thinking, like, it'd be good to get in front of it if I were him, to try to guide the narrative and where it goes. But when you're talking to 200 people, that narrative is out of control anyway. It's the story.
Yeah. I hope sometime I see Lawrence Martin to talk to him about how it went with his book on Chrétien, it's 2 books, but Iron Man, which I think that anyone who's interested in Canadian politics, that's a important and helpful book. During the research for this, I read Richard Gwynn's book, Northern Magus, about Pierre Trudeau. And by the time you finish reading that book, you think, geez, he knows everything about these people. He knew things about their marriage, about things that happen at meetings. Now, and something I only learned while I was researching this, that he had been a staffer, Gwynn, who was a Toronto Star reporter and quite an important.
He was a Liberal staffer?
He had been a staffer for Eric Kearns, so who was a cabinet minister, Montreal Anglo MP from Montreal.
Liberal staffer became a Toronto Star reporter.
If I have my facts right, which I think I do.
Makes sense.
But also, he writes in the book that everyone whom we wanted to talked to him, which I can't say about this book. There was quite a number of people who I had hoped would talk to me who didn't. So I think that politicians are much more remote from the people who cover them than was the case then. Right. There's just been a steady stepping back, right? As we become more predatory and they become more protective, the relationship has changed significantly and will likely continue going that way. That, the politicians are in their little comms bubble where they don't want to say anything that makes them look bad. And
yeah, it's probably, my guess is this is all cyclical, where right now it's going away, but it may start turning at some point. Now, we could be talking decades. I just think the way people communicate, like, you need to be telling stories to get your narrative out, but also to build your legacy. If you're not doing it, other people are.
Yes, although I think that the increasingly politicians and companies and all sorts of people are able to do more of that communication directly through mediums, media that
their
they
own
control.
media.
Yeah, through social media, and this is something I've seen since I came here in 2004. The big newspaper bureaus, what they write is still very important, and you can't afford to set that aside if you're running a comms operation in politics. But it's less important. They're less important than they were, and the broadcast is less important than it was. You used to live or die about what was on the National and the CTV Evening News, and I think that's Much less so now.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where, like we look at partisanship in media and where some say some outlets are more partisan or, I know my friends in the Conservative Party have been really aggressive on that, particularly our leader. But if you look back at the history of Canada, look at the Globe and Mail, our daily newspaper was founded by a Liberal partisan and a Conservative partisan. It was two separate newspapers at one point. So it came around, then it became this standard. But
Halifax used to have 5 daily papers.
5.
And yeah, if my understanding is right, one of them was like a Catholic liberal paper and a Protestant liberal paper.
Wow.
And
yeah.
a Protestant conservative paper and so that everyone would have the newspaper of their tribe, of their, which was largely determined by religion and region and,
So things aren't that much different today. It's just the medium has changed, how we're communicating.
I think that there was a period when you had the agglomeration of the newspapers and you had the establishment of these monopoly broadsheets that were guided by the sort of philosophy that came from the Associated Press, right? That there's a standard way of reporting the news that would be the same for everything. So we started to think of this idea of an unbiased media as being the norm,
right.
And unbiased, what does that mean? It means that everyone's agreed to sort of share the same bias in a way.
Right, exactly.
And that's where that was a period that had a beginning, and we thought it was going to go on forever, and now that seems to be coming to an end.
Or going back to what it was before. Right. Again, a cycle, right? Where I think it'll just keep rotating around. But at the end of the day, I think books are the record. Like you mentioned the books that I've read most, or a lot of the ones that you've talked about. Like these are the standards that there are record keeping that we really have. So I think it's incredibly important that we have these and that people continue to read them and continue to write them. So I do hope the access is still there and that we can keep doing that. It'll be interesting with Poilievre, like when it gets, I know there's Andrew Lawton is writing a book on him, but I'm curious, like, will there be a real insider book 10 years from now, assuming he becomes Prime Minister, on all of his time?
I should say, I was saying there were people that I had hoped to get to talk to me who didn't. There were a great number of people who are not in the habit of giving interviews to newspapers or who said, okay, the guy's writing a book, I guess I should try to help him with that. It's important that I like to read those books. They would sort of explain why they were doing it, and it's because they want the record to be correct.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people, their name isn't in it because they didn't want.
Right.
They'd say, I'm working for this law firm now, and I don't, it wouldn't suit me to. So it was a privilege in a way to have those people sort of help explain things to me, what it's like inside. And often what I got from them was better questions to ask the next person. Right.
You get other threads to pull on to go down different roads on.
It was very interesting at times. Yeah.
Right. I think just back, like the book itself, like this, it's a record of the Prime Minister's time. And starting when, like I guess you cover his whole life, like, but you gloss over, I imagine, a bit of the younger years.
There's some sort of flashbacks to his youth to sort of explain who this person is, but it really begins when he declares in Papineau. Because I was there, actually.
Oh, you went down for it. I remember watching it online, because he did it online, something that was unheard of at the time.
And it was the first time I'd been to Papineau. It was interesting to go to that riding, and you see, it's like a very multicultural, at the heart of Montreal.
Safe, lucky seat up until Trudeau took it in 2008.
It hadn't been safe. They had it for one.
Was it just one term from 06 to 08?
Previously it was... what's his name now? It's in the book. The MP with the beautiful hair who had a pied de terre in Paris.
Pierre Pettigrew.
Pierre Pettigrew, that's right. So he lost it to Monique, I'm trying to remember the name of the Bloc MP, for one election in the sponsorship election of 2006.
Right, okay. I remember that election in 08 when he was running, Trudeau was running. And I remember I was a junior. I didn't have a lot of say in anything then, but I was like we should be doing something to help the block here.
Right.
Like, do not let this guy win this seat.
And it was a close run thing, and he worked.
Yeah. He had to work for his, I remember, because there was chatter then about him wanting to run and looking for a good Liberal seat that is a better seat.
He wanted Outremont.
And he had to go through the nomination process too, didn't he?
Yeah, so Stéphane Dion, Professor Dion, said, well, maybe I'll give you Outremont. And then he thought about it, and Marc Garneau was also seeking Outremont. And that was the late John Lapierre, who seemed to be unimpressed by Mr. Dion and resigned rather than run again under Mr. Dion. And Mr. Dion decided in the end not to give it to either Garneau, who he probably should have given it to, right? Rather than Justin. If you look you make an assessment of their careers and what they could have brought to the thing at the time, you'd say Garneau.
Right.
But instead he gave it to Jocelyn Coulin, another professor and a good friend who lost to Tom Mulcair.
Right.
In that riding.
Right.
So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's amazing how
Montreal.
history could have been so different, different twists and turns there. But it was interesting where it felt like the leadership was against Trudeau at the time, where he had to go and fight his own fight, and he always comes across as the underdog in a lot of these, which is funny. Your book is the prince; he is the son of Canada, but so many times he's the underdog at the same time.
Yeah, a Montreal Liberal official at the time said, "Look, the party did not want him. They were saying no." Are you crazy, right? We don't want a Trudeau. The Trudeau name is bad.
Right. They were supposed to get slaughtered in Quebec if he was going to run.
And he, again, as you say, he was the underdog and he proved them wrong. And it's one of those things that when you contemplate it, the guy worked like as hard as you did when you ran for office, or harder likely, in spite of the fact that he came from a place of great privilege. He humbled himself and threw himself into the grind of shaking hands and knocking on doors and cleaning parks, and so I give him credit for that. Right.
Right.
He had chosen his vocation and threw himself at it.
Right. And then he came here and he was an underdog in the big Brazeau versus Trudeau boxing match that I remember Sun News was putting together or somehow supported.
Shiny Pony. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah. That was one of the things too, where he was an underdog, and like Brazeau was supposed to clean his clock, but if you actually knew the two people and the two individuals, you knew that was not going to be the case, because Prime Minister Trudeau was a guy who trained, who worked, who did lots of martial arts, and Brazeau didn't, and it was not even a close match.
Yeah, I spoke to Trudeau in my interview about that, and he said that he told his stepfather, "Oh yeah, no, I'm going to win this. Go ahead and bet money on it."
Okay.
Right? That's the kind of... Yeah. And a former cabinet minister told me that, and I think this is true, that his confidence is like a superpower. Right? That Trudeau has this thing, I think it's princely confidence, right? It comes from this very unusual upbringing that he, it's sometimes misplaced, but his faith in himself and his ability to master a situation is unusual. It's an unusual quality.
It certainly is, particularly where, I'll get to today's polls in a second, but, it was the Papineau fight, the boxing match, obviously. He at times led going into the 2015, like the Liberals did in the polls, but going into that summer, they were in third for a while, and he was way behind, came back and won. 2019, he was behind and he won. 2021, he was behind and he won. So I can see now, not only his upbringing, but the facts are, out of all of these instances, he has been a huge underdog, and he comes in and he wins. So is he warped by this to not see it now, where you're 20 points back? Canadians, I think, have largely turned on him or tuned him out. Is he able to come back? And does he not realize that, it's hard to count him out based on his track record too. Maybe he can come back and somehow wrestle this down to at least a conservative minority, which maybe that's a win for the Liberal Party.
I feel like this perspective that you're expressing is like what people in the bubble thought 3 months ago, and now that the budget's come out and
Nothing's moved.
I feel there's a sort of sense. I'm not talking about my opinion, but among the 200 or 300 people in Ottawa who are running the political system, there's a growing, hardening sense that he's not able to get a message out. He's not able to connect. That he's not going to be able to beat Poilievre.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that's sort of settling in. Whereas that what you were describing, that while I was working on the book, people were saying, well, you know, and some people still believe this, right? Like he really is an extraordinary campaigner. If you look at after the blackface incident, for instance, a very, very difficult thing where his team really, they were concerned for their own personal reputations coming out of this, right? Like it was not a normal bad day on the campaign. It was
potentially catastrophic for everyone around.
Yes. And people saying, oh my gosh, this is, you know, I'm not going to be able to work anymore. People are going to think I'm associated with this terrible racist operation. You know, it was very, for liberals, more than it would have been for conservatives. It's hitting them where they live, and diversity, and, you know. And then to campaign his way through that, to apologize until there was nothing that anyone else could say that he hadn't agreed with.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like he ate it.
And I still maintain, I've said it numerous times, I think that issue actually got him reelected because conservatives just went on that like a dog on a bone. They dropped all their messaging on affordability and the economy, and they focused on blackface. They tried to make the ballot question, is Justin Trudeau racist or not? He's not. No one believes that. And I think we lost our message track by that. If we had made it like he's hurting us in the pocket, if we kept on that message, and it wasn't, I shouldn't say it's just a conservative fault. It was like, obviously there was, everyone was talking about this. It was, you couldn't avoid it. But when you turn that into the ballot question, which essentially it became, no one's going to believe he actually is. Yes, he was a dumb kid, but it doesn't mean he's racist.
That's an interesting way of looking at it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever agreed with me when I said that, but that's my take on it, my hot take. That's not so hot anymore.
Well, and I think that what I learned from reporting on it is that a lot of black liberals and liberals from other minority, you know, racialized liberals did a gut check. It took them 24 hours, and they said, no, it's okay. It's not okay. And it's terrible.
Right.
This is really not great at all. But we don't want Scheer, right? We think the Conservatives would be worse.
Yeah.
And he's our guy. We don't think he's racist. We think he's kind of a dummy, right? But he's our guy, and we're going to stick with him. And once that happened, then he was able to sort of come out of it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And when conservatives focus, though, just on that and stop talking about the economy, stop talking about affordability, which was a good issue. I think the poll, like Hamish Marshall was a campaign manager and the pollster then. I think he really found the issue that was important, but I don't think there was an ability for the party to communicate on it well because we got sidetracked by this.
Right.
And I think he put us on the right path, and I think we went off of it.
Well, and I think there were other problems with the Scheer.
Oh, there's lots for sure. Look, there's lots of issues to if you could figure wins and losses in campaigns, but I think that was a big one.
The a first French debate where Scheer struggled to respond
on abortion.
to the abortion in French, and I spoke to Mr. Mulcair about that, who was doing commentary for TVA. And he said he and Emmanuel Latraverse they did their stand-ups or their introduction in the studio and then walked to the green room to have dinner and watch the debate. And by the time they got to the green room, the debate was over.
Right.
Because Scheer had failed to respond effectively to that first question.
And that was devastating to the campaign because the tracking, I'm told, I wasn't involved in the campaign in 19, but I'm told this is a time, the Bloc Québécois were not even official party status at this time, right? The blue nationalist center-right vote was up for grabs, and we were going to take it. That was a big part of the strategy, and that's what the polling was showing we were about to do.
Right.
What happened from that night gave birth to the current Bloc Québécois, where they are. the number of seats that they have.
And they also got a big boost in the English debate, which I didn't write about in the book, when there was an identity issue brought in by one of the moderators. I think it was the next election. I don't know if you recall that, but
2021.
Yeah,
that was in 21 campaign that.
Yeah,
when they brought in some stuff or she said some things about Quebec that riled up Quebec nationalists. Yeah. But it didn't change a lot there. It wasn't some say it helped the Bloc.
I think it did. It polarized in a way that was different.
Numbers didn't really seem to shift from our perspective on that.
Yeah.
Because it's funny with Quebec, we were trying to grow there, and we had the Premier Legault, who was very popular at the time, basically said he wants a blue government. Yeah. It wasn't an endorsement of Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives, but it was a quasi-endorsement that he wants the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois to be the most seats. And
I found it interesting that Quebecers completely ignored his advice. Or that was my takeaway. Is he's saying, "Well, how you should vote federally."
They supported the Bloc,
right?
They got the most seats.
But he was kind of saying, "Wink, wink, nudge, nudge."
Right.
The Tories would help us.
It was interesting. Our numbers did go up, but we were in this danger zone where if our numbers went up a few more points, we would have caused a lot of Bloc MPs to lose their seats to Liberals, the way the three-way splits were working.
Right.
So we were in this funny area where we wanted a huge breakthrough. You want to get 30, 40, 50 seats. That'd be amazing. But if we got a few more points up in the polls, it could have been a wash where the Liberals could have got a majority out of it by us being more popular.
Those splits in Quebec can be so weird, like five-way races with a 3% margin between winner and loser in some of these ridings, right? It's the only province where you have those kind of, I think.
Typically, and also it's the only province that you can get every 40 or 50 years. There's a huge blue wave that just comes out of nowhere. I shouldn't say out of nowhere. It comes for good reason. Diefenbaker did it in the 50s. Maroney did it in the 80s. Yeah. And I think right now we're seeing where Poilievre is everywhere in English Canada. If you look at Quebec, you look at his ability to communicate in French. If he finds the right message that works there.
His partner, his wife.
She's a fantastic campaigner herself. She's grew up in Montreal. If they go out there and get the right, put together the right campaign, we could see a big blue wave in Quebec.
And if it's time for a change, and Quebecers see that English Canada is going to embrace this guy, and if they want to be at the table, as the saying goes, right?
Yeah. So I would think mid campaign is when we'll see that shift where the numbers will start surging.
But there's a couple, I think, issues that he will have to navigate before that can happen. Like, he wants to defund CBC.
Yep.
Does he want to defund Radio Canada?
No, he said he's not.
Right. So how? Explain that to me. So you're saying that Quebec should continue to have a French language.
Not Quebec. French Canada should have it because nothing. So I wrote this policy, so I actually know this very well. This is the same policy that we had in the last campaign. It was to scrap English Canada as CBC because we have so many English networks. We do not have a national French network in any way, private, other than Radcan. So it's to represent, there's Franco-Ontarians, Franco-Saskatchewans, Acadians. It's not just for Quebecers. So there is an importance for Radcan. So that's the
I think that, I mean, you're presenting it. It sounds reasonable, but
I'm just saying how it'll work. I'm not saying maybe it's not a good idea or not. But that's how it'll work.
Yeah, so that seems, I haven't actually thought carefully about what issues. I mean, abortion is always an issue. I think that should be much easier for Mr. Poilievre to respond to than it was for Mr. Scheer.
It's issues that pop up too, right? There's issues we're not even thinking about right now that come up in a campaign that could just explode on the horizon. That could hurt Poilievre in both Quebec and in all of rest of Canada. It could happen. And Trudeau, to his credit, has been very good at finding these wedges every election. In 2021, they called that election early because their polling said they were going to get a majority, and they wanted that majority. They were 2 years into a minority. They were wrong. They didn't predict, I guess, that we would be as ready as we were. We came out with a full platform right away. We were super aggressive. We were ready. They weren't ready. They had no narrative for the first few weeks. But what they got at the end... I
talked to former staffers who said that they watched the campaign roll out. People had been right in there with them, and they're watching at home going, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what campaign is this? What's it supposed to be about?
They couldn't even answer the simple question the day he called the election. Why did you call the election?
Yeah.
Like, that means you have no narrative, you have no plan, you have no thought of what you're doing.
And then you had Afghanistan, which was a nightmare.
It was a distraction, just talking politically here. It wasn't moving votes, though. People were watching it. They weren't thinking, because we had people on our side, like, we got to go talk about Afghanistan. It's like people aren't paying attention to the level you think they are and equating it to electoral politics.
Right.
It's a foreign problem that's happening that's very serious, but it's not going to move your votes.
But at the time when the Liberals should have been explaining why they were having this campaign, suddenly they were talking
why they
about,
needed a majority. Tell us why you need a majority.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that. But what saved them was the spike in COVID in the last week of the campaign. That's where our numbers tanked.
And in the book, I talked to Aaron O'Toole about that, and his belief is that the Liberals knew that when the schools in Alberta opened again, that cases would spike.
Right.
So that was part of their election planning.
I don't know if they're that crafty. That would be then if that's the case, this next election is going to be interesting to see what they have lined up, because that's a hell of a plan. It did work out for them. He's right that what happened was our polling had us winning that election, and Thursday night, Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta at the time, closed down Alberta, put in lockdowns again. Numbers were spiking across the country. And our numbers tanked in the next 4 days, and we lost the election. And our polling, we did an exit poll after, and we talked to our own supporters, and they said we didn't take COVID seriously enough. And we tried, but we had people that were anti-vax and that really were anti-mandate. And it was tough sledding as a conservative, the Conservative coalition is so big and broad, and you have so many different parts you have to keep happy.
As always in Canadian politics, divisions within the Conservative Party are exploited by the Liberals to their advantage, right?
That's why the next one with Trudeau, will he make his...
It goes back to Diefenbaker, goes back, the same Stanfield, the same thing keeps happening.
Yeah.
Because it's less of a natural coalition than the building out from the cities that the Liberals do, I think.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see if Trudeau has something, if they have something up their sleeve that I think it's almost like in 2018, the Liberals too ran out of gas in Ontario, where Kathleen Wynne was just done. There was no getting her reelected. We could have ran anyone. And we won that. So I don't know if that's where we are in Canada or if...
Well, and we don't know that Justin Trudeau is going to be the candidate. I mean, he says he is, but there's a lot of road between here and where we're going, and he can pull over to an exit at any time, right? Right.
Well, maybe he'll read your book and say, I've done enough. I'm good.
He'll say, look, this fellow seems to have done a good job. Maybe you should...
Legacy's protected. I can ride off into the sunset now. Go for a walk in the sand and tell us you're leaving.
Yeah.
Good. Well, look, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed having you on. I should say, is there anything juicy in the book that we should...
There's all kinds of juicy things, but I don't want to give it away. What I should tell people is that it comes out on May 28th.
Yep.
There's a lot of beautiful color photos in it. It makes a fantastic gift. And they should go out and get a copy of it, really, or not just one, but, several at a time, really.
Well, it truly is. Like, this is a piece...
Hardcover. It has a beautiful photo on the cover.
It does. And a nice image of...
Several very... penetrating insights from Fred Delory.
Well, I hope people enjoy those too. But I think it's again, it's one of those books. It's one of those. It's a history. It's a part of our history when you write these books. It's something that we keep, and it's not just an article or a podcast or a news story that's out there that's absorbed and gone within a few days. It's one of those things that you keep on your shelf that generations can read after, and I think that's incredibly important. This is a part of our history right here.
As I started working on it, I was very focused on, I need to get stuff that nobody else has and new insight. As the book went along, I started to be more thinking like, wow, I really have to make sure that my understanding of this is correct.
Right.
And so I sort of focused more and more on like trying to be accurate. And I feel that I am. I'm sort of not really worried. You're always worried that you'll get something wrong, but that's like I think I understand what happened there.
Right. Well, as long as it's not like your robocall stories, I'm sure it'll be fine.
We could talk about those at length if you'd like.
No, I'm good. I had Glenn on the show.
Lingering questions that perhaps you can shed light on.
There's lingering scars, I would say, but we're good. Okay. Well, look, this was again a lot of fun. Always enjoyed chatting with you.
Our pleasure.
Look forward to reading the book and talking more about it, and having you on another time too, whenever you're in town again.
Fantastic, Fred. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks. All right, folks, thanks so much for listening in. Another fun podcast. It was a lot of fun. I hope you got a lot out of it. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for next week's brand new episode of On Background.